presentation of his oeuvre. Is that?
Yes.
Yeah, John has published so many books. Most of y'all know John's work. I've known John now for about, 16, 17 years, I guess. Truly one of this country's great nature writers. I don't know, I could just sit here and pour on accolades, I guess, about John's writing and his career as a writer. He knows this region. He worked at Nantahala Outdoor Center as a young person.
10 years.
Chris Lechner is here, who I think you and John go all the way back to NOC days. Don't see Doug and Trish Woodward here tonight, but John's got a deep connection to this place. And I think John is one of the writers in this country who understands connection to place. If you haven't read his book, Circling Home, many of his other books would give you just a sense of how good of a writer John is with respect to how connecting to place is so important, how we live our lives and live them meaningfully. His new book, Coming into Animal Presence, Mercer University Press, 2 months ago, John, a month ago, has just come out, which is, we'll be going into that fairly deeply, but I wanted to start out by just saying a little bit about John's career as the founder of the Environmental Studies program at Wofford. You really were the brain behind starting the environmental studies at Wofford and a Thinking Like a River program at Wofford, and a career that really has just been this incredible, an admirable life. Just the way you have connected to nature in so many different ways, which comes out in this new book, Coming into Animal Presence, and so many of the other books over there, just about a life where a person has paid attention to place and attention to animals and attention to human beings and how we interact with the natural world. That's enough.
Thank you, Brent.
Let's get on.
That is enough.
Shut up, Brent. God, where's Angela? Tell me to shut up.
Well, you knew I
So,
was
John,
kidding.
I thought she'd be throwing things at me in another 30 seconds. We did this last night, and here I am still talking. But
That's all right.
I wanted to just let John start out, and however you want to go with this, but just talk about how this book came about, your process as a writer, and how this book is where it is in the current, continuum of your writing.
Yeah. Okay, thank you, Brent. Thank you, Angela. Thanks to Rickman Store, wonderful place. Thanks to Cowee School. I'm so excited about the things that are happening there, and look forward to being involved with all that in the future, because it's a focus spot, and it's going to become more and more that through time. And excited. This is a great place to have a conversation as well. So people are always asking me how I write so much. I want to try to give you a little, just for a brief moment, a little idea about how this book came about. Because I just didn't sit down and write it in 6 weeks or something, which is maybe it looks like it. I had another book come out, it's over there on the table, called Still Upright and Headed Downstream, the collected river writing of John Lane, and it came out last spring. And then this one right on the heels of that, Coming in Animal Presence. But the river writing book is a pretty big book, and the pieces in there span about 35 years. There are pieces in there I published 35 years ago. And what I do often with these collections, because I write book-length narratives like Coyote Settles the South, or Neighborhood Hawks, or Circling Home, or Deliverance, where I'll get started on a project and I'll just go with it, and I write a draft of it, and then I write another draft and another draft, another draft. And that might be a 2 or 3 year project. But I'm always writing periodical pieces. I'm always writing for magazines and writing essays and journalism and things like that. And so those are all just piling up on my computer. And because they come from me, and I have a particular type of voice, they do fit together, but I don't know how they're going to fit together. And the river book, I put it together chronologically. The earliest piece in the book was written and published in the early 1980s. And then I come all the way forward to a piece about paddling the Okefenokee Swamp with Brent and Angela, and there was a whole group of us. And that's the last piece in that book. So, but I pulled all those together and presented that, and I knew that I had a bunch of pieces about animals that I wanted to pull together, and I didn't know what the book would look like. So I actually kept putting it off, and the River book came out before this one, and this one was supposed to come out first. But I didn't know what this book was going to be, and then finally I pulled everything together, and I had just 15 pieces, so it ended up being a small book, a short book, and I was interested in this idea of how I've explored the intersection of my life with animals, and not all animals. There are no domestic animal pieces in this book. There are no great essays about my dog Murphy. I'd like to write an essay about Murphy sometime, but I haven't done that yet. And there's also no real there's no real work in here about animals as food. And I know that's an area that I really would like to look at sometime and think about. But what I instead decided to focus on was wild animals and the interactions I've had with wild animals through the years. But when I sat down and I put all the pieces together, I realized that some of the essays, somebody might be 3 or 4 pages into it, and you're trying to figure out, so where's the animal? What's the animal here? Because there are just as many pieces about people in this book as there are about animals.
Other animals, yeah.
Yes, yeah, they're animals too. So that's how I put the book together. I just pulled it all together and arranged it and rearranged it and came up with this order that Brent last night recognized, and I'd never thought of it. It actually goes from a young woman, a girl, trying to get a Columbian mammoth made the state fossil of South Carolina, to a piece at the end about an old man who dies of prostate cancer. So it does have a little bit of shape to it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. It's a bookended kind of collection where, I mean, it really occurred to me when we were talking about it last night how you end with 2 elegies, 2 very important people in your life, James Kilgo and Barry Lopez, who, if Barry Lopez haven't passed just in the last year, and then beginning with this young child, almost in this state of innocence about, like how innocent could something be, like a child wanting to be a fossil collector and make it a state fossil, and how it turned into this political nightmare. Yeah,
let me start by reading the beginning of the book. This is the very first few paragraphs. I've got about 5 passages I want to read because I'm a writer. I'm not a philosopher. I'm not a guru. I'm a writer. I love to write, and I love the books to go out into the world and have people interact with me through what I write. And this piece is called Chronophilia. One of the themes that shoots through almost all my work, like quartz through granite, is time. I was almost a geology major as a student at Wofford College. I took all 3 of the geology classes that were available to us, and I was converted to the idea of deep time. And so that's what I sort of mean by love of time, chronophilia. And I'm also playing with E.O. Wilson a little bit there now that I think about it, because E.O. Wilson has a book called Biophilia. Well, this is chronophilia. On the surface, 8-year-old Olivia McDonald's request didn't seem that radical. The young South Carolinian asked her legislature to adopt the Columbian mammoth as the state fossil. South Carolina has many certified state symbols: folk dance, amphibian, animal, beverage, butterfly, color, gemstone, and onward, alphabetically through over 50 categories. But South Carolina is only one of 9 states without a state fossil. I have no idea what the state fossil of North Carolina is. or if North Carolina it has a state fossil. Strom Thurmond.
One of our commissioners, maybe.
Olivia explained in her letter to the legislature that she wanted the mammoth because she read that a fossil tooth of the extinct elephant was discovered in South Carolina in a swamp by enslaved people in 1725, one of the earliest of such discoveries. Once the request was formalized into a bill, a state senator filibustered against it for several hours before concluding, quote, "I thought we had passed a bill in the Senate putting a moratorium on official state whatevers. There's got to be a stopping point," unquote. Another South Carolina senator tried unsuccessfully to insert 3 verses from the King James version of the book of Genesis. And I'm not going to read them, but it's, "And God said, let the earth bring forth the living," Genesis. When the change was considered inappropriate, when that change, the insertion of that into the bill, was considered inappropriate, a new amendment was adopted. The mammoth would be deemed, quote, "as created on the 6th day with the beast of the field." So you know where this is going. I write and I continue in here to explore the idea of what it means when someone or an entire people don't believe in deep time and are unwilling to accept deep time as a position. And I also talk about a geologist at Wofford that I learned from and that I studied with named John Harrington. And also, this is more of an essay journalism piece than a lot of the pieces in the book. I also talk about an actual University of South Carolina professor from the early 20th century who taught evolution and was one of the first. So it hasn't always been that South Carolina was full of.
Well, that's an interesting part of the story. Yeah. And you reference William Jennings Bryan and the Scopes monkey trial, and I don't know how much you want to talk about that. But.
Yeah, let me read the last paragraph of this essay, because this kind of launches off into the book, I think. So, the love of time comes up again. "This love for time of mine is the underpinning of my love for the natural world. I love the rocks because their certainty is dense and reliable. I love the forest because the clock of their days runs on sunlight and water. I love the rivers and the streams because their flow is filtered through millions of moments. The animals, each of us is a fuse set to expire in some sudden moment, even you." So that launches us into the concerns of this book, I think.
Yeah, and I think, back to the way the book is bookended, I think that the meat of the book in between the way that you talk about Barry Lopez and James Kilgo is about your direct experience with the natural world.
Yeah, and my argument with it.
And your argument with it.
With the way that we've described it.
Yeah, and we could...
Because, I understand that there are people, and we can snicker and laugh, or I can, about whether they're intelligent or not. But I understand there are people out there who don't either understand deep time or believe in deep time. I understand that. But I'm not one of those people. I came to it, was converted by it. There's a lot of religion in this book. As a teenager and just past a teenager, and that love and that understanding of deep time has animated much of my connection to the natural world.
Do you want to say some more about religion in this book?
Well, I didn't even know it was in there, and then I was at I should have known, but I was at a reading the other night and down on the coast, and it was like this. I was being interviewed by a woman who runs this weekly newspaper down in Beaufort, and she'd been Pat Conroy's research assistant for many years, and then Pat died, and she became the editor of this newspaper. So she came into the interview with about 6 pages of notes, and over half of her questions were about either God or spirituality. And I was even this essay I just read, she wanted to talk about it in terms of spirituality. Then she gets to this essay about Jim Kilgo. Has anybody read James Kilgo? Anybody read his book? It's got a book. He's been dead now for almost 20 years. Taught at the University of Georgia for many years. He was probably the first Southern nature writer to have any sort of national profile. He published a book in the 80s called Deep Enough for Ivory Bills, a book that talked a lot about hunting, but it also talked about just the joy and the love of the deep Southern woods. That image, Deep Enough for Ivory Bills, he used to say he'd always go across this big bridge, across a swamp down in South Carolina, and wonder as a child if that swamp was deep enough for ivory bills. And so Kilgo was a really close friend of mine, and we did a lot together. He died of prostate cancer as a young man, only 61, he was an evangelical Christian, and I'm not an evangelical Christian, and we always would have great discussions and conversations about this, and I'd kid him and tell him that I was an agnostic, and then try to explain my agnosticism to Jim, and then Jim would try to explain how he felt like that if there was going to be any saving of the South and the wilds of the South, it was going to be done through churches. He really believed that the churches were going to be the places that you could go in and you could convince people, and then you could actually get something done with conservation in the South. And so in this essay, I remember a moment in Jim's life when he was going to write a book about Ossabaw Island. Anybody been there? Down on the coast of Georgia? It's a beautiful wild island. Jim there'd never been a book written about it. Jim was going to go there and write about it. And when he first went down there, he saw this pig, this wild pig, and he was convinced that this pig was one of the original pigs that came from the Spanish because of the particular way the sun glinted off this pig, some pig called a Mengalita pig or something. So he had this whole thing in his head that he had seen the pig, the original pig. And he wrote an essay about it, and he described it as being almost godlike with a small g. He talked about a lumen appearing out of this pig when he was looking at it. And then as Jim's cancer progressed and he got closer to death, he decided not to write about Ossabaw Island. Instead, he wrote about a trip to Africa, and he wrote about Albert Schweitzer, and he wrote about his Christianity. And this essay about the pig, he kept revising it and revising the paganism out of it. And I had the drafts, and I would look at them and I would say, God, look at this choice he made. He knew he only had a couple years to live, and he made a choice to shape his writing to fit more with what he believed at the time. And so this whole essay is called Wild God, and it's me trying to struggle with it. I'm going to read the agnostic paragraph because it's one of my favorites in this essay. Okay. Two paragraphs. Calling myself an agnostic, I anxiously looked and listened for spiritual connection everywhere. Like a spiritual metal detector, seeking the ping. I use that metaphor throughout the essay, the ping, like ping, ping, like a metal detector has, or a ping, ping, ping. Seeking the ping. For me, the truer sound is the deepest ping. In my deeply Methodist, Buddhist, inflected agnosticism, I thought of spirituality as a universal bedrock that creation sits upon, like the Star Wars Force. Religions were human constructions layered on top of this metaphoric bedrock, like sediment, with the oldest layer being the various paganisms, followed by the big world religions, Hinduism, Buddhism, Christianity, Islam, laid down as the religious floods receded century by century, the latest layer being the muddy effluvium of worldwide secularism. So I'm sort of building this metaphor. And then agnostics can be considered among the religiously unaffiliated, those who say they believe in nothing in particular about God. This idea of believing in nothing in particular does not appeal to me. So now I even question my agnosticism. I believe in everything in particular. The 10,000 things, the great bursting forth of life into myriad forms, worlds without end. I fit squarely in the camp that believes that the existence of the ultimate cause, like a God, and the essential nature of things are unknown and always unknowable, a quality I call mystery. I've spent much of my life worshiping at mystery's altar. I balk at the agnostic idea that human knowledge is limited to only experience. So I guess I'd have to say that I'm even agnostic about being an agnostic. I'm agnostic, I once said to my college chaplain. John, you're not only an agnostic, he said, you're an evangelical agnostic. There was one other sentence in here, or one little paragraph, Brent, that we said we liked. I'm not sure I can find it now. So,
We were talking about well, I'm sorry, I think it's the same essay, but
yeah. Where is that thing about process?
I don't know.
I don't know that.
Oh, can I?
Oh, here it is. Now, this I really got challenged by. When I was in Beaufort, I was at the Penn Center where Martin Luther King wrote all of his speeches out on St. Helena Island. And I felt a little uncomfortable reading this paragraph, but we had some great discussion come out of it. Isn't there something else? I'm asking myself, something harder, deeper, greater than bedrock, going back to the metaphor I've developed earlier. Don't I worry about my soul? I haven't worried since high school that my individual soul was at stake. I believe that the soul of this particular planet is contained in wildness and diversity. And these are my primary values. They are the arc of the universe is long. Y'all can all know where I'm going with this. The arc of the universe is long, I say, apologies to Dr. King, and it bends toward wildness. Or as Gary Snyder says, wild means process. The wildness is the world. This is not me, this is Snyder. The wildness is the world. The human agency is only a small part of it. So last night we kind of skirted past this idea of wilderness, wildness. What do they mean? Which word should we use? And we really didn't ever come up with a working definition of wildness. But there it is. I think wildness is process. And what I mean by that, and what Snyder I think means by that, is like last night there was someone in the audience and they were fixated on the idea that wilderness is what she missed. She wants to be able to go into what she called an untrammeled wilderness. She wanted to be able to step into that, and anybody in this room knows there isn't a lot of that out there now. But there's a lot of wildness going on constantly. There's a lot of process. Weather is a process. Climate is a process.
I think too, it's a way of now maybe even
the pandemic is a process.
Yes, it's like redefining.
It's wild.
It's redefining wildness in many ways.
Yeah.
Because if the arc of the universe is bending towards wildness, this is a wildness like we've never known before.
Yes.
And that's what I don't think we haven't figured out and may not figure out until it's too late for us as a species. But I can see how the arc of the universe is bending towards wildness. And wildness we can't quite yet understand. And
also, Dr. King said, if you remember, the exact quote is, the arc of the moral universe bends toward justice. And I'm 100% with him on that the arc of the moral universe bends toward justice. But I really do believe as a geology student and as a person who is not a scientist but tends toward science, that the universe, if it bends toward anything, it bends toward process or wildness.
And we got into a discussion last night about the difference between mystery and wonder.
Oh, God.
Okay.
And I decided that I should have used the word wonder there rather than mystery.
Yes.
Because mystery to me seems now, and maybe I was right. Maybe I'm the writer and I chose the right word. But mystery to me seems solvable. Often mysteries are solvable with enough. They're not always, but they can often be solved. I used to make a joke about science that with enough time and enough money and enough brain power, a lot of questions can be answered. And a lot of mysteries can be solved. But wonder is something that is unsolvable and unexpected.
Yeah.
And I think this book is full of a lot of wonder.
I think so too. That's the beauty of it. And I think mystery may be even unsolvable, depending on how we use the term. Back to the book and your discussion about E.O. Wilson in the book. Most of you probably
second essay
familiar with E.O. Wilson.
Yeah.
And E.O. Wilson basically, he's an Alabama boy, damned religion as being the scourge of the earth. And
Grew up a Baptist, grew up a fundamental Baptist.
Yeah. And, Wilson as a scientist said we need to absolutely escape from religion. Religion is what is dragging us down. And you had issues with Wilson because you disagreed with Wilson.
Well, actually, it's funnier than that. Let me read you the beginning.
Middle of agnosticism.
Let me read you the beginning of the Wilson essay. The Wilson essay, and I admire E.O. Wilson deeply as a thinker, as a scientist, as a writer, incredible writer. But I struggle with him too. And I had an essay for many, many years on my computer called Ant Farm, and I wanted it to be an essay about E.O. Wilson, and I didn't know where I was going to go with it. And then suddenly one day, this is how it happens for writers sometimes. I'm sitting at my computer, and I'd started this essay with Wilson. And my struggling with his ideas. And then I remembered an old girlfriend from 1980 and a problem I had with her. And that started the essay. And here's the first few paragraphs of it. I'm going to read down through a page and a half. In the spring of 1980, my girlfriend said, "My biology textbook calls your poetry nothing but hormones and enzymes." Of course, the book was E.O. Wilson's Sociobiology, published 5 years earlier. And the exchange was a romantic shot across the bow of a potential mate. I was hurt, but I tried not to show it. I'd never heard of E.O. Wilson, so I didn't consider what he had to say in a biology textbook particularly important on the subject of poetry. After all, in 1980, we were just a few decades past C.P. Snow's idea of two cultures, and I was clearly on the side of what Snow called the literary intellectuals. I went straight to the library, though, and discovered Wilson was known as the Ant-Man. More interestingly, he was Southern like me. He'd grown up a Baptist in Alabama. His love of the natural world started early. As a child, he'd been the first to describe the introduction of fire ants on Mobile Bay. Then he'd gone on to Harvard for graduate school and figured out that ants communicate by secreting a number of small chemicals called pheromones. As part of his research, I love this. As part of his research, this is so much a scientist. As part of his research, he'd made a paste out of ants and spread a sweep of ant calligraphy on a sheet of plexiglass and watched the individual ants follow his trail. This experiment was a major signpost for Wilson's celebrity. And then all through the essay, I just list ant facts. I'll have this italic square, and here are my ant facts right after that. So break. Ants are helpful, but they also enslave. They farm. They forage. They also mine. In Arizona, ants find garnets and drag them to the surface. Ants have existed for 130 million years. For pheromones, there's pheromones again, and it's coming back, I promise you. Pheromones can identify which nest an ant is from and also define an ant's social status. Break. As a poet, I knew about pheromones, though I didn't call them that. I'd followed pheromones into several ill-fated relationships, like that one with my girlfriend. We argued all the time. She planned to go to medical school, and I wanted nothing but to write poems. As a poet, my evolutionary fitness was already in question. And then it gets a little darker. The essay gets a little darker. My father committed suicide when I was 5. And suicide is one of those subjects that Wilson is fascinated with and writes about. And my favorite novelist is Walker Percy. And Walker Percy's father and his grandfather and his great-grandfather all committed suicide. And so Percy writes a lot about suicide in his novels. And Wilson decides that Camus is wrong. Why people commit suicide is not the question, but the question is why people don't commit suicide. And so my essay becomes sort of a questioning about that, because I really had a bad relationship with that girlfriend.
We're still talking about her 40 years
Yeah, still quite. I hope she doesn't find the book. No, she won't mind. She'll remember that probably. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
We'll go somewhere else.
Yes, let's go somewhere else.
Okay. Let's go to page 65 and 68, where you and I had a conversation about economics.
Oh boy. 65.
Was it 65?
No, it was not.
God, I've got all kinds of notes scribbled down here.
65. The middle part of this book is a series of journal entries that go from 77 to 2002. And that's what 65 is.
Yeah, so 58 was the question.
58.
Was at the heart of the mystery, are we always working for someone, or is there any freedom
Oh,
from the
yeah,
economic
yeah.
questions?
Yeah. Oh, that is a great little exchange.
Yes.
What page
And
was that?
and then on page 68, I'm sorry, that was 58. And then on 68 is the question of why does every place have to be worth something in our capitalistic terms?
Yeah, okay. This exchange, there's a character in this book named Ab, and he was one of my mentors at Wofford. He ended up sponsoring a couple of interims for me when I was a student. One, I went to the Everglades and stayed for a month. That one was called The Flora and Fauna of the Everglades. A friend of mine and I went down. And then I did an alligator survey with him in Florida and wrote a bunch of essays about it. And this is kind of an outtake from one of those essays. And I'm asking him about the natural world. And I'm going to move back and forth between these two characters, the Ab and then the me. I'm going to start just a little before that. We're on a ranch called Babcock Ranch down near Tampa, and this guy has invited Ab in to decide whether he can farm alligators on the ranch. He's got a lot of wild alligators. This is the 1980s, and his cattle business has gone through the floor, and he wants to figure out whether he can make money off of alligators. And he's brought in Ab as a consultant. And I say, the grass was green and looked as if we were seeing it through a filtered lens. I didn't understand anything about this small cypress head, much less about Babcock Ranch. All I knew at that moment was that it was one of the most beautiful spots I'd ever seen, and nobody should be able to own it. We're real communist, aren't I? Why can't we just assign a non-value to a place like this, I ask? Why does every place have to be worth something in our capitalistic terms? And Ab says, you've got 4 approaches you can take to the world, John. You can drop out, you can sign up and become a part of the system, you can revolt, or you can compromise. That's it. That's all I've seen work. They're all unacceptable to me too, but there's no other option that I can think of. But what about the older system, the one, the alligators and those cows, where we're seeing these wild cows all through this back part of the ranch? The older system, where the one the alligators and those cows are part of. Why is everything in the world defined in terms of our system? Because we can, because we have. But you know that's not good enough for me either. I watched a little breeze rippling the water, making waves in the grass. Let's get to work, Ab smiled. We walked the edge of the pond and saw some tail drags of a big alligator, but no other signs. Later, we would fly over the pond in a plane and hope to see a big male sunning. That would be the only way we'd ever get back to Boyd's Head Bay. So those four possibilities. Is he missing one? What do you think, Brent? Once again, they are drop out, sign up, revolt, or compromise. Drop out, sign up, revolt, or compromise.
I don't know.
What have you done?
Compromised. Like most of us, I think we compromise.
I tried dropping out. I didn't have a job, a full-time job until I came to Wofford when I was 34. I mean, I'd make a little bit of money here and a little bit of money there, but I tried to drop out. It didn't work. I didn't ever try the revolt.
Yeah, I mean, we talked a little bit about how science and romanticism split at a particular point in American history, or perhaps Western civilization anyway, and how some of us went down this path of romanticism and some of us went down this scientific path. And the world is forever trying to figure its way back towards the center, it feels like. So a lot of us, I feel like, who got into that track of being in a romantic path always are compromising. I feel like we're compromising our consciousness all the time, because what we feel, and we talked about this last night, what we feel is what we know. And there was a quote in the book about that.
Yeah, Retke's. Anybody know the Retke poem, Theodore Retke, The Waking? It's a villanelle he wrote in the 50s. It goes, I wake, and this is hard to follow, but I love it. I wake to sleep and take my waking slow. I feel my fate and what I cannot fear. I learn by going where I have to go. And then he has this line that I've just pondered forever. It's, we think by feeling, what is there to know? We think by feeling, what is there to know? And it's a paradox. Yeah.
Yeah.
I wake to sleep and take my waking slow is a paradox too.
Which is, that's Emily Dickinson said that too in the line, didn't she? I thought Emily Dickinson had.
She could have said it another way.
Yeah, maybe so.
Yeah.
I wake to sleep and take my waking slow.
Yeah.
But yeah, personally, I feel like my life has been a compromise because I haven't known how to live any other way. Because I've been stuck in this romantic worldview, because I believe in everything that I think a lot of people in this room believe in, which is like beauty and nature and, all the things that motivate us to get up out of bed every morning, which is maybe it's a bird feeder, maybe it's like getting to go walk the dog. But that's the kind of stuff that that keeps us alive and living.
Can I move back about a foot?
Let's look at
I got the sun. There we go, right there.
It looks really
now I can't see anybody.
Looks painful.
Anything.
Looks really painful. So anyway, I think I'm digressing a little bit. I didn't answer that question because it's a tough question, and maybe others can weigh in on that.
And there probably, there probably are other. That journal entry was written in the 1980s, and it'd be interesting to think about us as a people, and have we come up with other options? Is that reductionist to say there's only 4 ways we can respond to the world?
Even people now
is.
feel like people are dropping out,
Yeah.
but they're still dropping out while they are still in. You know what I'm saying?
What are the other essays?
God, there's so many to talk about. Should we read the last paragraph of the book and see where things go with everyone?
Last night, Brent started our talk by having me read the last paragraph of the book, which was interesting to think back through and to present a spoiler. But here's the way I end my book. The last essay is an elegy for my friend and mentor, one of my mentors, Barry Lopez, and who died of prostate cancer 2 years ago at 74. And at the end, the essay is called Piedmont Elegy, and I play with the idea, Piedmont Dreams, and I play with the idea of his Arctic dreams and my commitment to place and my commitment to South Carolina. And but here's the way I end the book. Barry forged a language reverential and deep, and he continued an old monastic method best shown in Arctic Dreams. Go into the landscape, try to understand, but first listen and see. Note your presence so your hard-won lessons can be used by you and others later. So basically, he kept saying over and over at the end of his life that all he wanted was to be useful, for his work to be useful. And I think that's what I'm trying to say at the end of this book, is that I hope there's something about this book that's useful.
I think there might be, John.
I hope so. Let's open it up.
Might be choice number 5.
It could be useful. Compromise, revolt, be useful. Let's open it up. I'm sure that maybe there are some questions.
I'd like to take a stab at the 4 choices.
Yeah.
To me, it's like a toolbox. I don't believe you have to commit to any one of the 4. You can use all 4 of them as a 5th possibility. And then when you use it in that flexible fashion, even more ideas and ways of being and doing are going to occur.
Mm-hmm.
The overcommitting to any one of these imperfect processes is
Propositions,
not amenable to a ongoing creative approach.
Yeah.
to stay in balance. I mean, I don't
Yeah.
think you can just be this or just be that. And maybe it refers to morality. Is there a real morality here?
Hmm.
And so
Interesting.
is it just personal? Is it God? Does nature give it to us? Where does it come from?
It'd be interesting to think about living, or it'd be interesting for me to think about living my life out from college to now through each of those paths. I think that's part of what I was frustrated with when we were on that ranch with those alligators. I mean, I wanted that ranch. What I wanted in this narrative, it was never published. The full narrative was never published. What I wanted was that ranch to be saved. I wanted him to give up his value. You know, this guy. This was a 100,000 acre cattle ranch in Florida with a 9,000 acre uncut cypress swamp at the middle of it, at the center of it. And since then, actually, they have saved the 9,000 acre cypress swamp. But the rest of the ranch is so close to Fort Myers now that it's under great development pressure, whereas it wasn't in the 80s. But when I went down there, I wanted it saved, and Ab wanted to give the guy, as a scientist, his best answer about his alligators. So we spent this 10 days down there exploring the whole ranch, and I guess I was still in sort of the revolt or the revolt part of that thing.
Option.
Yeah. And Ab was in the compromise. Ab wanted that stipend the guy was going to give him, you know, and he wanted, he was just interested in alligators and wanted to know, he wasn't worried about the alligators going extinct. You know, even if the guy farmed the alligators, he wasn't going to lose them. They weren't, the population wasn't.
They weren't threatened with being.
No.
Yeah.
By that point in 1988, alligators were off the endangered species list. And we all know now they've done really well. I mean, everybody thought in 1972 that by the turn of the century there would be no more American alligators. The scientists told us that. They were wrong. You know, they came back. Just like black bears. I went to a black bear conference when I was at NOC in 1984 in Asheville, and 2 or 3 researchers stood up there and said the black bear was not endangered, but that it was not doing well in Western North Carolina. And I think they've done pretty well.
They've done so well that the state game agency thinks that we need to be killing more of them. So,
and Ab always one of his bits. He was a scientist, but one of his bits of wisdom that he always told me. He said, "You're too soft-hearted with these animals, John. You know, the question you always have to ask about every animal is the death of that animal threatening the species? You know, if an animal is being eaten or being farmed or whatever." And so I've started doing this thing. James Dickey says the same thing in a poem called "The Last Wolverine." James Dickey has this great line. He says about the Wolverine. At that point, he thought there would be no Wolverines. At some point, he was wrong about that too. But James Dickey says, "Lord," to the Wolverines, "Lord, let me die, but not die out." And I have gotten this prayer that I have this prayer now that I say as I'm driving down the highway and I see roadkill. I've gotten it now to, I don't even know what this is called, but I used to have to always say, "Lord, die, but don't die out," to every animal I saw on the side of the road. And now I've gotten it where all I have to do is lift 3 fingers and it says the
Automatic prayer.
It's like a prayer flag. Yeah. So now every time I pass something killed on the road, I always lift 3 fingers on my right hand. And I'm saying, "Lord, die to that animal." You know, it's dead. There's nothing I can do about that dead animal, but don't die out. And think about the animals we mostly see on the side of the road.
Yeah.
White-tailed deer, die or die out. Die or die out. Yeah, they're not dying out. I mean, they're not possums. I mean, I feel it with all my heart every time. And I know I'm not completely dismissing. There's 3 or 4 essays, The Bear in the Freezer, we need to talk about in this book. at some point. But I'm always like every animal. I'm really good. My wife says I can identify anything at 60 miles an hour, and I'm real good at it. But
I mean, back to Barry Lopez. I mean, I don't want to leave this subject too bad. I mean, I really think this is a really good subject.
But what are we still talking about?
About dead animals on the highway. And how we differentiate between species and how we prioritize some species over others, particularly ourselves over others.
Some we love, some we hate, some we eat. Where's Hal Herzog when we need him?
Absolutely. But I think it begins with at least an acknowledgement as you're passing that dead animal that there's a dead animal and it was killed.
That's what I do every
innocently
time.
By a car, a stupid damn car.
Yeah.
With a stupid damn driver behind the wheel that
I don't know. Okay, I'm going to confess something. Last week, I think I had been 25 years without killing anything on the road. 25 years without any death on the road. That's what'd you just call me? Stupid damn. All right. All right. So I'm driving last week in my subdivision and suicide squirrel, bam, dead squirrel.
Yep.
And I've prided myself that I've not killed a squirrel or anything, a dog, a cat, a deer, anything.
Insects?
And insects. Let's drop down.
Those are all gone anyway.
Yeah, they're most. All right, and then what happens? The next day, I kill a second squirrel. In 1 week, I killed 2 squirrels. And I could not have stopped that.
Yeah.
I couldn't keep from killing those squirrels.
I mean, back to Barry Lopez, because I know
Lord, let me die, but not die out.
Yes, and I get that. It's this has been some years back.
He has a great book about roadkill, by the way. It's called Apologia.
He did it for about a year, I think, where every time he passed a dead animal, he kept a glove and he took the animal off the roadside and acknowledged it.
I've done a lot of that in my life, too.
Yeah.
I do it now because I don't want the vultures to get run over that stop to eat it. You know, that's the main reason I pull them off the road.
Yeah.
But I pull a lot of stuff off the road.
Yeah.
There's a lot of death in this book. There's a bear that dies. There's a goose that dies. There are turtles that die. There Barry and Jim die.
Oh yeah, right.
Yeah.
But I mean, I think
so. But wouldn't y'all agree that part of coming into animal presence is finding a way to accept mortality, not only their mortality, but one's own mortality.
Well, I think at the same time as being, and I think this comes through really clear in the book, is being present with animals.
Yeah.
Which we're so bad at.
Yeah.
You know, I mean, some we do eat. Obviously, we're not very present with those animals that we eat, right?
Yeah. Well, they become part of you. So
Yeah, they become part of us. It becomes a different kind of presence.
Yeah.
Right?
There's only one moment in
It's a
this.
cellular level.
Yeah, there's only one moment in the book where I got to. Angela asked me about this morning. So in a piece called the Goose on the Pond is the closest I get to food writing. A goose lands on this little frog pond that we have next to the house. It's just a small, and I wake up one morning and there's a goose sitting on the frog pond. And so that's what I am. I called my brother-in-law. It's just one of those country club birds, he says. Kill it. I can use the meat. He loves geese and ducks and quail, and so that's what he says to me.
That's what I'm thinking.
It's one of those country club birds. Kill it. I can use the meat. I don't think I can kill it, I said. Well, just leave it, he said. There was a coyote in my yard last night. Maybe it'll kill it. Then I called my friend, a hunter. He assured me that if it wasn't spooked by my close approach, it was probably pretty badly hit and was going to die. Oh, I hate that, he said. If they hit an organ, it'll die. It's the wounded animals like this that give hunters a bad name. So what we find out is there's a duck pond nearby, and probably they've been hunting ducks that morning. And just one pellet. And the goose dies during the day. I go out and check on it. You know, I bring out a little corn, put there and stuff. The goose dies during the day, and then I end by saying, I got to read this. This is why I make fun of myself. Okay. At dawn, I walked out and found the goose dead next to the pond. It had been pretty cold overnight, but the goose was still warm. Her little black, we decided it was a female when my hunter friend came over, because of the size. Her little black bead of an eye still seemed alive, the eye that had watched me the final day of her life. The body was stiff, even though the long, elegant neck was still flexible. I picked her up and saw finally that her breast was speckled with little pink stains where the pellets had entered and found their mark. I over sentimentalized that dead goose. I held her to my chest and whispered like Timothy Treadwell to that wild grizzly in Werner Herzog's Grizzly Man, I love you, I love you, I love you. But what exactly was it that I loved? Was it the idea of surviving wildness and how that goose and the coyotes and the crows and the vultures roosting in my neighbor's trees embody it? Or was it also a longing for that thing missing in me? So it's about absence and presence and how they are both the same. The reason I've wanted to write about coyotes in my suburb isn't to try to fill some emptiness entirely, some blank slate of understanding about them. It's also to understand me. I put the goose in the back of my truck, wrapped it in a plastic bag, and I took her over to my brother-in-law. As he said, he would cook it up and invite us over. So, and he did. Yeah, he did.
Was it good?
It was pretty good. It was a country club goose.
Pretty good.
Well,
Yeah.
so here's an idea.
Yeah.
So consider all of the animals and roadkills and how long this has been going on. So what I've noted with the deer in particular is they tend to be the slow and stupid ones. So they're being eliminated. And so we actually get smarter, faster deer. Same thing for possums, coons, etc. You can't apply that to the insects because we have this insect apocalypse.
Right.
But these highways are evolving a different type of beast.
Well, there's no doubt about that. I mean, you read these
I mean,
books.
coyotes have crossed from California to here.
Yeah, you read these books about suburban wildlife and the evolution of many species is speeding up because of things like highways. And you say no, not speeding up.
Well, I would say actually with insects or other critters that have multiple generations per year,
Yeah.
that evolutionary rate might be speeding up, but with larger animals, they're going to
Adapt rather than
the
evolve.
rate of change that we've introduced, we've gone from walking speeds, horse and buggies, in the early 1900s
Yeah.
to 400, 500 mile an hour planes and
Yeah.
80 mile an hour vehicles. The animals don't have the ability to. So, I mean, over time, given a large enough population support for those species,
Mm-hmm.
they would adapt. But in the short time we've had high speed highways and stuff, it's not going to happen.
Yeah. Hadn't been very long for one
It's-
thing.
It's species loss.
Yeah.
The insect apocalypse on a different
Yeah.
impact from
That's another whole
habitat
book.
loss and
Coming into
pesticide use.
Coming into insect presence would be another whole book.
And then we might really be getting somewhere.
Yeah.
Then that would be a different level. Human consciousness could really make a shift. And maybe.
What else? Yes, Chris.
I just finished reading Barry Lopez. As you know, we've been sharing about that. But it seems to me that his spirit enjoyed the religious aspects of indigenous peoples, and he tried to enter into that.
Yeah.
So how do you, to me there's two sides of the coin, but I'm interested in your thought. You have brutal science, and then you have what we're calling religion maybe, storytelling, religion, whatever you want to call it, but I just don't see how I will ever go through my life without giving honor to both. I would never want to. I mean, even the stories that you tell about the dead animal on the road is very religious, and that's very peculiar to your sentiment.
Yeah.
I don't do that, but I have sentiments similar to yours. So I guess my question is, why do we keep shoving beautiful storytelling and religious ideas into science and back and forth as if one is the winner? I mean, Barry Lopez, the beauty of him as a man to me is he stood one leg on each.
Yeah.
So I guess that's my question.
No, I think you're right. I do think though that it'd be interesting. I always thought it was interesting how much when I would talk about, say, Ab, my scientist friend, talk about Barry Lopez with Ab. Ab enjoyed Lopez, but he didn't feel like Lopez really understood his world very well. That he really did not stand with a leg in each world. That even though Barry spent thousands of hours with field scientists and trying to understand, but Ab still felt like that somehow, because he was a storyteller, because he popularized science, that somehow he wasn't entirely over into. I thought about that today. I took a walk today with everyone. With
Dan Patillo.
Dan Patillo, but great botanist. And I'm at the back of the line, and I'm watching and listening to all of these people who know all of this botany, and I know about that much botany. And maybe more, maybe that much botany. I know that much botany. But Dan Patillo knows this room's worth of botany, and there were 3 or 4 people on the trip who knew not the whole room, but knew at least 3 walls of the room. Mm-hmm. And I talk about this all the time with my friend Drew Lanham, who's a great ornithologist. And Drew doesn't enjoy being with groups anymore where people are playing one up on I know this much and I know a little bit more and all this stuff. He just doesn't enjoy it. And I found myself at the back of the line going, wow, what I want to do is I want to go home and write an essay or a short story about this walk in the woods with Don Patillo. That's what I want to do. I am not interested in learning any more about the spring woods in Cowee, North Carolina today. Instead, I want to make a story. Well, I missed a lot because of that, because I was already making the story in my head with the characters, with the setting, with the themes. And one of the themes was this idea of naming things and how important it is to name things. And so I would say that there's still a lot of argument with people about whether nature writers have a foot in clearly, or whether scientists who write beautifully like E.O. Wilson have a foot in both worlds. They're still very different worlds, I think.
But it was so interesting, John, to be out there today listening to Dan Patillo, who is just such a serious scientist. And so many of us just out there as these pseudoscientists are just like always trying to absorb more and learn more. Naturalists, just trying to, understand the plant world, understand the botanical world on another level all the time, seeking for that kind of meaning. And I knew exactly what you were doing because I've known you so long.
I wandered further and further towards the back of the group.
I just kept watching you and going, John isn't seeing this at all the way we're seeing this. He's seeing this whole thing as a story.
It was a story. The minute I got there and began to see the characters, and the story, the narrative, and the setting, and the themes, it was all. I mean, it was. I mean, I could have written a poem too, or an essay, or it could have been a novel, or part of not a short story, not a novel.
And that's why you are 1,000% a damn writer.
I'm a writer. I'm not a philosopher. I'm not. But I do feel like that when I sit down and I set about trying to make these things, that I do make poems and stories and essays that take people to some place and make them think about things in a way maybe they haven't thought about them before. I bet everybody's going to look at Roadkill a little bit different,
Hope so.
After tonight.
What else? It helped me to see you doing that. Go ahead, Lawson.
Oh, yeah. So what's the difference between a botanist and a naturalist who studies plants?
I would say, and I'm just taking a stab at that. Probably not a difference between a botanist and a naturalist, but I would say that it has to do with how they define themselves. And botanists, and particularly Dan talked a lot about his research. He talked about the way that he fit within a certain world, that he did this master's degree on this, that he did his dissertation on this, and his colleagues were working on this. And so it has a lot to do, I think, with fitting in a world.
So it might be then pieces versus wholeness.
Yeah, could be.
Because they get down to the point where, it's like,
Yeah.
alteration of one chromosome.
Yeah.
Of one.
Was definitely specialized today in a way that.
So it's like you left the natural field
Mhm.
by being a research botanist.
Yeah, I have a friend
And
who.
you're probably trying to invent some drug that
Yeah, somebody's
charging
gonna.
people $6,000 a month for.
Yeah, yeah. I had a friend who's a herpetologist who's published 1 million. Actually, he's in the book a good bit. I used to travel with him all the time when I was a student, and he's got 1 million publications now. He worked at the Savannah River Wildlife Lab for 35 years. Studied one single population of salamanders, and he had a drift fence around this whole Carolina Bay, and he would go out every spring, and he would. This is terrible, but the salamanders would come in, and he would pick them up out of the drift fence buckets, and he would clip a toe off each salamander, and then keep a chart so he could recognize these individual salamanders. And then when they bred, they'd go in and bred. He'd flip them over the fence. They'd go into the bay and breed. And then when they were coming out again, he'd mark them again. And he did that every spring, and he did it for 35 years, the same population of salamanders. And it used to drive him crazy when I would have a book come out or an article come out, and somebody would call me an ecologist. Because I write about the natural world, and they would say, John Lane, the ecologist. And he would go, I did all this training. I've got this PhD, and they're calling you an ecologist, and I'm an ecologist. You're not an ecologist. It was partially a joke, but it wasn't a joke too. I mean, he was very serious about that.
And I think that's a question that we could go really deep on, because you go all the way back.
Well, now I want to add what's an ecologist.
Yeah, well, yeah, really. I mean, as far as these constructs go.
These things matter a little bit.
They do. Yeah.
They matter in certain worlds.
In certain worlds. So, I
Well,
mean, I think another way of looking at it is like.
Here's
back
the
to-
answer. A naturalist probably is less likely to cut a toe off a salamander.
That's true. That's true.
If you need, yeah.
I never asked him what he did with all those toes.
A naturalist might cut a toenail off of his or her girlfriend's.
I would imagine in
with a glass of
2020,
wine.
I would imagine in 2022 they're cutting a lot less toes off salamanders than they were in 1980.
Let's explain the new breed that evolved of total salamanders. Just to frustrate your friends.
I've had the opportunity to take a couple botanists in the woods for a walk, and I get accused of being a naturalist, but I don't know about animals, so I don't claim that. I'm a plant nerd, but I don't have multiple degrees. I think that's an answer. One answer to your question is a botanist is someone with like a pedigree, PhDs in botany, or plant science, and naturalists are more in tune. But I've had the experience of taking a botanist for a walk in the woods and showing them a plant for the first time, because they've seen it in a pressing in a room at a
Herbarium or something.
at an
Yeah.
herbarium,
Yeah.
and didn't know the plant in the woods and so.
Yeah. Yeah. I experienced
They
some.
call it a terminal degree.
Yeah.
Right.
Because you
That's right.
you went into a dead end. Like, technically speaking, you can't get a PhD as a poet, although I have one.
Yeah.
But you have to sort of fake it. Like you have to the poetry is part of it.
Are you
But
a postdoc now?
no, I don't know what other than that. I have the best job ever now. But anyway,
I think, back to the naturalist question, because I love that question.
Yeah.
I think one of the most incredible naturalists that I've ever known in my life died 3 weeks ago, George Ellison. I would define George Ellison
He
as
was
a
a great
naturalist. What made him a naturalist? He had a damn master's degree in journalism. Okay, he was a great poet. He studied nature in a way that most scientists don't study it.
Yeah.
I think he saw it completely from going back to a kind of a Thoreauvian
Yeah.
way, which I think Thoreau was really that was the demarcation line. It's a great passage in Walden about how Thoreau encounters a mouse in Walden, writes about that mouse, and then at the same time he says, I don't know anything about mice. And I'm going to send this mouse off to a zoologist, which was an emerging field going like the Cuvier or those early 19th century zoologists who are finally starting to dissect animals and understand the internal mechanisms and the way they work. Thoreau's like, I'm a writer and an observer, and I can write about the way this mouse moves through my house and the way I've seen it act in the field and my interaction with that mouse, but I don't know anything about mice. And that's where I think naturalists can trace themselves really to Bartram. And I think with like Bartram being this merging of like romanticism or emerging romanticism and Linnaean nomenclature, and that was the divide. I think Bartram was the clear divide in all of this in history. It's like Bartram was at this intersection between science and art, and he had to merge those
And commerce.
Yeah, another subject. yeah.
At least his father.
Yeah, at least his father. There's a lot we can talk about with that. But anyway, I think, like that to me, a naturalist is someone who's more of an artist than they are a scientist. At the same time, they understand the scientific principles and can articulate the science of to the whatever, like Adam. You know enough about botany that you could talk a hell of a lot about botany. You're not a PhD botanist, but I would consider you like a damn good botanist. Right.
An amateur means
I claim amateur botanist,
amateur means a lover of the thing.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, that's what the word means.
But you also understand the folklore of the species, and there's that element of it too, that a scientist sitting in a
somebody who
university
sits
might not have.
and is able to have feet in both of those worlds, and also has another foot in another world, because we are, mostly talking about it from a European descent.
Yeah.
Is Robin Kimmerer
Yeah.
and Braiding Sweetgrass, where she talks about her approach to science from an indigenous perspective and traditional environmental knowledge, traditional indigenous wisdom is very much. I saw something yesterday, just a meme on the internet, on Facebook, and it was like traditional tech or traditional environmental knowledge is science with heart.
Yeah,
I like that.
That stuck with me a little bit.
science with a
Still thinking
conscience.
about that.
Yeah,
Because we can't quantify like love or intention in science,
right.
but you can't say they don't have impact.
Yeah, profound impact.
And quantified 10,000 years ago, right? Epigenetics, right? Yeah, sure.
Or if I just extend that a second, I mean, what does science really do for us? Like make better asphalt? I mean, just not.
It does do that.
Yeah. No, I mean, it's kind of like, I mean, you try to read along those lines because, you learn from it, but I mean, what's the ultimate, whatever aim of it? To me, it doesn't seem to be to get back to the natural world. Sort of like, takes a strain of something.
A lot of great scientists working for the American Petroleum Institute, right?
So I have one paragraph I want to read. It'll be my last word. This is from an essay that I wrote about James Dickey and Dickey's poems about animals, which I love. And I wrote, until that time we survive this fraught age, we need to ask and answer questions about the lines between us and animals we are willing to leave behind. We need to question our human exceptionalism. What is it to be present to animals, to the world they embody and are contained in? How do animals make us feel? What do animals mean? What do we mean? What do they mean to us? Can we become animal, or are we already animal? I feel at times that I just don't know how to properly think about this. I recently heard a podcast where the novelist Richard Powers, author of The Overstory, said that fiction must rediscover a story beyond the human. I think that poetry has never lost that recognition. It's always known about the blurring, the merging, the story beyond. Maybe the proper way to think of all this is through poetry. Poetry and animals. The more we call their names and tell their stories, the closer we feel kin to them. That's the essay in the James Dickey. It's called James Dickey, and
Oh, okay.
yeah.
Oh, great.
Yeah.
Well, thanks everyone.
Thank you.
For coming tonight.
Thanks.
This was
Yes.
wonderful.
Thank you. Thank you, Brent.